It's been a while since I made my last video looking at the Marvel Famous Covers line, but today I'm picking up where I left off, and this time I'm going to be looking at the founding fathers of the Marvel Universe as we know it today, or at least the founding members of the Avengers. And that trinity of power, of course, is Captain America, Iron Man, and Thor. And I'm particularly excited to get into this video because some of these figures are amongst the best in the entire line. First up we have Captain America, and once again we can see that wonderful packaging design. We have the big illustration on the right hand corner of the character himself, which looks very nicely painted. Then we have these fireworks in the left hand corner, which is kind of surprising because there's usually some sort of symbolic element here, and I thought they would have opted for the American flag, but instead I guess they've gone for the idea of fireworks celebrating the 4th of July. And the famous cover that they have, well, it's Avengers number 4. And certainly I think it deserves its reputation as an iconic cover. It did of course serve as Cap's reintroduction to the Marvel Universe after lying dormant in the ice since the Second World War. And as an added bonus, it does feature 2 other characters that appear in this video. The side panel is consistent with the other releases in the line. They have the character's logo in font, and then they have this very nice illustrated image at the bottom of the packaging, which, if I'm not mistaken, looks to be a digitized version of a Rob Liefeld image. I'm a big fan of this approach. I think it looks really nice and presentable, and it looks very neat on the shelf when you decide to stack all these packages together. Now, sadly, on the reverse of the packaging, and this is the same for all 3 of these figures in today's video, we have that advert for the mail away exclusive Aunt May figure. I'm not going to say any more on that. If you want my thoughts on that figure, you can check out my last video in part 6 where I do actually review it. And then we have the wonderful gatefold cover, which when you open it up has this wonderful presentation. On the right hand side we can see the figure in that window display looking pretty fantastic. Meanwhile, on the left hand side we have a little bit of text about Steve Rogers, Captain America, and of course Avengers number 4. And then we have a couple of very nice illustrated images that we've seen elsewhere in the packaging. So once he's liberated from his packaging, one of the first things you'll notice is how tremendously bright and colourful this figure is. The next thing you'll probably notice is the head sculpt. Yep, Toy Biz decided once again to give this figure a shouting sculpt, and I can understand the impulse with this one. After all, Cap will often be barking commands and orders to the team, telling them what to do, directing battles, so it kind of makes sense. It's just that it so rarely works out well when they decide to do a sculpt like this, and frankly this line wasn't the best at it. Perhaps it's just me and I'm being a bit too picky, but it does really limit the amount of poses you can put the character in, because it will look a bit silly if you want him in a more restful pose or to create a more dramatic scene that isn't action heavy. But nevertheless, it's well intentioned and I don't think it's too distracting. Now, probably the most glaring standout issue with this figure is going to be the star on Cap's chest, because yeah, it is quite deformed, it is far too stretched, and it does look a little bit ludicrous, and it's a real shame because it does spoil what is otherwise a really awesome figure. He's also been saddled with those rather unflattering big chunky rubber gloves that we've seen on other figures. In their defence though, they have improved it ever so slightly in that they've made the rubber a lot thinner this time, so it doesn't look quite so glaring, and in truth it actually gets away with it pretty nicely. Thankfully, they didn't give him the big chunky boots to match, which is definitely a godsend. They've given him this soft faux leather instead, and this looks really good. This looks a lot more naturalistic. Now, there is that slightly unsightly seam running down the centre of him, which is a shame that they didn't do that around the back and underneath, but nevertheless, this is a nice touch, and is nice to the touch because it's quite textured as well. Now, the articulation is the same scheme that we've seen applied to the rest of the figures in this line, but I will just quickly run through it again. Obviously, Cap has that ball joint in the head, and I say it's a ball joint because really it's more of a swivel with a slight wobble. You can't really make him look up and down, but it will move slightly from side to side. He does have those fantastic ball joints, however, that really arc all the way up and out, which is pretty fantastic. There's a complementary bicep swivel, and there is a single jointed elbow. There is a pin swivel at the wrist as well, which allows the hands to rotate 360 degrees, and of course they will hinge forwards and backwards as well. And then of course he has a ball joint at the waist, which allows for maximum posability. He can move from side to side, he can lean from left to right, and of course he can bend forwards and backwards as well. So this is all top notch. There's a ball joint in the hips allowing the legs to kick out to the side, kick forwards and all the way back as well, which is great. Now there is also a single jointed knee which allows the leg to bend to roughly 90 degrees, and then there's another pin swivel at the ankle as well. Cap is also one of the few figures that comes with an accessory. In this case, of course, it is his trusty shield, which is fantastic. And this is very nicely moulded. We can see there's several layers to this rather than just being painted on. That star is sculpted into this, which is very, very nicely done. And it's all in all very nicely painted. On the reverse, there are two elastic straps that will allow you to put this onto his arm. And this is pretty effective. It's pretty well hidden and it looks really quite nice. And the scale of the shield to Cap looks pretty appropriate. So all in all, this is quite a nice figure despite having a couple of things that let it down, such as the gloves and of course that star, and depending on how you feel about shouting head sculpts. But certainly the figure is bright, colourful and a lot of fun, and I think true to the spirit of the character. Next up we have Iron Man, and I absolutely love the front of this packaging. I think they've done a fantastic job. All the colours really work and complement each other, and it definitely has evoked the spirit of Iron Man. I think they've done such a great job of this. So of course we have that illustrated image of Iron Man there, that portrait, which is very nicely painted. We have some green schematics in the background, and then of course we have the famous cover, which in this case is Invincible Iron Man number 126. I can't really argue with this choice. It's one of the most famous Iron Man covers of all time, if not the most famous, and I think even going beyond comic book covers, it's probably one of the most famous Iron Man images ever produced. And when we open up the front flap there, this is a thing of beauty. I love this. The Iron Man himself just really jumps out at you. I think that figure looks absolutely glorious. So bright, so colourful, and it just looks so wonderfully presented here. And of course we have those fantastic images on the left hand side, and of course the usual bio. So all in all, yeah, this is really strong stuff, looks really nice. Now I was really fascinated to see how they would approach Iron Man, because he's a difficult character to pull off for this line. But I'm pleased to say they really pulled it off. They managed to get the mechanical, technological aspects of the suit into this design, but at the same time making sure that he was flexible enough to operate as a superhero. Most of this suit, the torso, the hands, the feet, and of course the helmet, are all plastic pieces. I think this is a really smart move. For the most part, they've utilised the metallic paint to make sure that it's nice and glossy and shiny and catches the light just right, and it works quite well with the sculpting as well, because this allows us to have an Iron Man helmet, but we can also take that helmet off to reveal Tony Stark underneath, and it all looks pretty good in terms of proportion. The worst that I think can be said about the Iron Man helmet is that maybe it's a little bit too big, but as I said, it seems to work perfectly in proportion with the rest of the suit, so it isn't that distracting at all, and I actually think it works very, very nicely. Now, in terms of the Tony Stark head, I think they've done a really nice job. They have utilised a new mould for this head, which is great. There's a very distinct, different look here from other figures we've seen, such as Spider-Man, for example. And they've done a really nice job of painted in his tash, his hair. This looks very much recognisable as Tony Stark as he was presented in the comics at this time, which is awesome stuff. As I said, the plastic armour pieces work very, very nicely, especially that wonderful metallic paint coating that they've got that really catches the light, most particularly on the torso, and it all seems to complement each other. It all seems to flow as pretty much a consistent shade of red throughout, and it looks very, very rich and very sumptuous. You might be wondering why mine actually has sticky tape and a covering over the arc reactor. Well, this is how it actually comes. I've never wanted to peel that off, but you can do, and I'm sure it would look even better. Thankfully, Toy Biz definitely had their eye on the ball when they were making this figure, so they've thankfully given him plastic hands and feet rather than the rubber gloves or boots. So this looks really nice, it looks very neatly in proportion, and it works perfectly well in terms of articulation, which is great. And in case you're wondering how the articulation works with some of these hard plastic pieces, I'll quickly point out that there's literally no hindrance whatsoever. The head can still rotate 360 degrees, the ball joint in the shoulders allow the arms to kick up and out just as you'd hope, the hands and feet still pivot, and thanks to the central tunic being split into two parts, we can still get the most out of the waist articulation as well. The only limitation that I could find is in the hinged hips, because of course there are those plastic discs which prevent the legs from kicking all the way out. But all in all, I absolutely adore this figure. I think he's one of my top favourites in the entire line, if not possibly my very favourite. I just think they've done an amazing job of him, and he's so much fun, and he just works on every level. Okay, and then finally today we have the mighty Thor, and again the presentation is absolutely fantastic. Wonderful illustrated image there of Thor looking really strong and powerful, which is great. And then of course we have that slight vortex thunder whirlwind, which looks pretty cool. And then of course we have the famous cover, and it is Journey into Mystery number 83, which of course is Thor's first appearance, which is pretty cool and certainly deserving of its famous cover status. Once again, on the interior we have a couple of fantastic images there, the usual bio that we've come to expect by now, and of course on the right hand side we have the figure in that window display looking pretty cool. Thor is another character that can be very tricky to pull off in a line like this. There is a certain number of decisions that have to be made that will determine the ultimate outcome. And one of those decisions is going to be the hair. And somewhat bravely, Toy Biz opted to go with real hair. This can often be a risky strategy at the best of times, but coupled with the fact that they have to put a helmet on him and keep that helmet in place, this can have serious repercussions. But I'm pleased to say it works really very well. The helmet is very securely attached, and the hair actually helps the figure stay in proportion and actually looks quite authentic. Although if I was being critical, I might say that it's a little bit too bright, it's a little bit too stark a yellow. It maybe needs to be toned down just a little bit, but nevertheless this is pretty cool. Now, one of the criticisms of this line might be that the body molds, because they are all recycled for every character, tend to be a little bit too big, a bit too muscular. But in Thor's case, this works perfectly well. In fact, he looks perfectly in proportion, and this looks really authentic to what we see in the comic book. So he's one of the few characters who actually really benefits from this very large frame. And I think they've done an absolutely fantastic job of rendering his comic book costume on this figure. It works really, really nice. Everything looks perfectly in proportion, and it looks really authentic, which is fantastic. And they've even gone to the trouble of sculpting special boots for him. Now, they are rubber, but these are so much better than the other ones that we're used to seeing, and this looks really nice, nicely sculpted, nicely painted too. There's some fantastic paint apps going on here, so these look really, really good. His cape has also been deftly tailored as well. This looks really nice. They've managed to sew it in a loop over his shoulders, so this looks really regal. It looks really nicely done, but it's also quite a stretchy, flexible material as well, which has plenty of give in it, allows you to stretch it out, and there's possibilities to be able to wrap it around him if you persevere. So I think they've done a fantastic job of this, and it looks very, very presentable. And then finally, he also comes with Mjolnir, and they've done a great job with this. Again, it's a very, very nice sculpt. The head in particular has loads of detail. This looks properly worn. This has seen some battles. There's some fantastic sculpting here, and it is complemented with a fantastic paint wash. There's a number of different colours here that make it look really authentic and very, very worn, which is brilliant. Now, the shaft itself is a little bit too chunky probably, but it does allow him to hold it perfectly. There's no issues with his grip here, and it looks really cool. So then, all in all, I have to say this is a fantastic range of figures from this line. All three of these are great, but I think the 2 stars obviously have to be Iron Man and Thor. They've done wonderful jobs of these. These figures feel like they've really hit their stride and that they've really just nailed this down. These look brilliant. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos soon.